everyone, my name's Calvin and welcome back to another watercolor tutorial for Procreate. So today we're going to paint a really simple seal illustration like this one, and I'll put a link to the exact sketch that I use in the description along with all the brushes, textures, and everything else. To start, I've got a blank watercolor paper texture already loaded up in Procreate, and I'm just going to use the regular brush kit, pretty much just the abstract round, the fine liner pen, and the water blender. And I'm going to start by adjusting the opacity of my sketch. And you got to make sure that the sketch isn't too dark, and also that you change the transparency mode to multiply. Because this has a white background, if you don't change it to multiply, it'll just cover up what you're painting. But after that, I'm just going to select a layer underneath the paper texture, and I'll grab the abstract round. And I'm going to start by using a sort of desaturated bluish gray color. And I'm going to really roughly fill out the outline of the seal here. And I'm trying to use a lot of variation in pressure because I want to get a lot of variation in texture here. And the first pass looks pretty good, but I want even more texture. So I'm going to go over it again here, but this time pressing much harder. And when I do that second layer, it does sort of double up and get a little bit darker. And that's exactly the kind of texture that looks good on this project. Now after that, I'm going to grab the water blender. And just in a few areas, I'm just going to break up those hard edges, but I'm going to try to leave plenty behind because it does have a nice look. Now after that, I'm going to grab the eraser brush, and I'm going to set that to the fine liner pen. And at a really small size, I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to cut out the sort of silhouette of the seal. So after I've sort of cut out the seal, I need to separate it from this extra sort of watercolor edge. And I'm going to do that with the selection tool. So I'm going to grab the selection tool, set it to automatic. And I'm going to click and drag on the body of the seal, and I'm just trying to select the silhouette of the seal. So if it looks like that, you've gone too far, so I'm just going to back it up just until only the body of the seal is selected. And then I can just go down here and click copy and paste. And before we were just working on one layer, but after I clicked copy and paste, it made a new layer above, and it sort of isolated our selection. So I'm going to go back to the original one and just delete it because I don't need that anymore. And I'm left with just this sort of silhouette. Next, I'm going to try to define the shading here. And I'm going to do all of that with the selection tool set to freehand. And the fin here is pretty easy. I'm just going to try to select the fin like that, sort of following the sketch. Then I'll go to hue, saturation, and brightness and just darken it, just so it stands off a little bit. And I'll do a similar thing on this one. And next, I'm going to add some shading to the tail here. So I'm just going to make a selection like this, just to drop in a shadow there as well. And that's it for the hard shadows. Now the soft shadows, I'm going to use the same freehand selection tool, but I'm going to feather it. So I need there to be a soft shadow over here. So I'll make a selection that just sort of loosely follows that edge. I'll go to feather, feather it out, hue, saturation, and brightness, and just darken it. And I'm going to use this same technique to add shadows like that in a few other places. So that looks pretty good. I'm just going to grab the water blender and I'm going to mix up some of these hard edges. So where I did the shadows, it does have like a really sharp edge. So I'm just going to try to work that back and forth with the water blender just to make it a little bit more gradual. Now this edge I don't have to mess with, but I definitely need to soften this one. And next I want to add a hard outline in just a few areas. So I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to use the same color that I did the body of the seal, but I'm going to change my brush to the fine liner pen. And I'm going to set that really small. And just in a few edges here, I'm going to start very lightly and just kind of outline it. Then I'm going to press harder and harder and then just kind of taper it off. Now, it's a little bit hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this layer to multiply. And there we go. It's much easier to see. And I'm just going to add a hard edge like that just in a few random places. But I'm going to try not to get too carried away with it. So there we go. I've just added that sort of edge in maybe 10 different places, but I really focused it here down on the fin just to sort of define those edges. And if those outlines are a little bit too dark, you can always go and just lower the opacity of that layer, but I think it looks good when they're pretty strong. So this one is almost done. I just want to add some texture along the back there. So I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to select the stippling brush. Yeah, stippling large. It's just the very top brush in the regular watercolor brush kit. And I'm going to use the same color that I did the body of the seal. But I'm going to also set this one to multiply just so it shows up better. And when I use that at varying sort of levels of pressure, it's going to give me these random kind of dots, I guess. And in a few areas it does go over the edge, so I'll just grab the eraser, set it pretty large, and just sort of clean that up a little bit. Now because we did that on a different layer, I can just lower the opacity and just raise it back up just until I can barely see it. I want this texture to be pretty subtle. And next I'm going to move on to the face here. So I need the sketch, so I'm going to turn that one back on. And I'll do the facial features on a different layer. And I'm going to select not pure black, but maybe a pretty dark blue color like that. And I'm going to grab the fine liner pen. And the face is really easy. It's just make sure the nose is kind of shaped like this. So it's not like a round nose. It just has this kind of almost like a heart shape actually. And then the eye, you could definitely do the eye sort of realistically like this. But I think I really like it when it's just kind of like this. It's kind of cute, kind of like the eyes closed. And now the whiskers are really easy. I'm just going to do them like this. And then where it overlaps, I'm just going to grab the eraser and just kind of edit that back so it lines up with the silhouette. And I think just for fun, I want to add kind of a rosy cheek. So I'm going to turn off the sketch. I'll make a new layer and just choose a kind of rosy red color. And I think I'll still use the fine liner pen. Just sort of draw that out like that. I'll grab the water blender just to soften the edge a little bit. And then because I did this on a totally separate layer, I can adjust the opacity and set it really, really light, just so you can barely see it there. And there we go. This one is all done. And I don't know why, but I really enjoyed painting this one. There's not a lot of detailed features that you need to worry about. And then of course the end result prints out really nicely and it's really satisfying to hold. And again, all the things I used to do this, the brushes, the textures, even the sketch, I'll put download links to in the description down below. And that pretty much wraps it up. As always, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.